Hello, welcome to another episode of China Today 2020. In this particular episode, I'm going to talk about the differences of the Chinese society versus the Western societies. Okay, let's start. Yesterday, by the time you watch this video, is a week ago. Okay, on March the 5th, 2022, the fifth session of the 30th National People's Congress of China opened in the Great Hall of the People in Beijing. I'm taking most of the information from a Chinese website, and the address is located at the bottom of the screen at the moment. So let's compare first of all the Chinese version of democracy against the Western version of democracy. First of all, China calls its own democracy as a whole process people's democracy. So what's the difference between Chinese democracy versus the Western democracy? Okay, we can look at it from several different points of view. First of all is the democracy's focus. In Chinese democracy, it is focuses on the output of the democracy, that is, the performance of the government. Whereas in the Western style democracy, people just interested in the formation of the government and whether the government can actually produce effective governance is not the concern. So the focus is different. Chinese people's process, the whole process, people's democracy focuses on the outputs of the democracy. And the decision-making process is focused on responding to public opinion and promoting the improvement of people's livelihood. So democracy in both the classical sense and the modern Western sense only emphasize the input end of the democracy, while the Chinese-style democracy lies in paying more attention to the output end of the democracy. People's demands are responded to. Democracy is to improve people's well-being. We have seen a large number of government work reports reflect people's livelihood, especially during this Congress. The second is that Chinese democracy attach a great importance to the deliberation process or the consultation process, absorb all the ideas and wisdom from all different parties, interested parties, and use the consultation process to absorb the checks and balances. Chinese deliberative democracy is the aggregation of ideas, not aggregation of preference. When you have aggregation of preferences, that means you are not based on realistic factual information, whereas it's only based on people's political ideology. Therefore, there is always no compromise. But if you are aggregating ideas and then making the ideas to work together, then the ideas must be based on reality and based on facts, and therefore it is easy to reach a compromise. Various opinions and wisdom from all sides can be effectively gathered. This kind of policy process is also like the Chinese-style hot pot. I don't know whether you know what hot pot is. Hot pot is where we have boiling water in the middle, and then everybody put their preferred kinds of vegetable, meat, etc. into the pot and cook it there, and then of course you ate what you put in. But at the end, the soup itself is a mix of all the tastes people have put into the hot pot. So that is a metaphor for Chinese policy process. Different participants are constantly feeding into it, and the resulting soup is a mixed taste. In particular, during the consultation period, disagreement and different ideas are integrated into the final report. It is to improve rather than to veto. In the process of drafting any government reports, the National People's Congress, that means the Congress member, needs to be repeatedly consulted. By the time the two sessions of the National People's Congress, the opinions put forward by representatives and members of the CPC has already been carefully studied and absorbed, and even those opinions that cannot be absorbed will be given specific feedback. That means everybody understands what the report is. Therefore, a lot of times we notice that it seems that the National Congress looked like a rubber stamp. Almost all government reports are passed in very high percentage. Of course, it will, because by the time the report is finished, all the members of the Congress have already read through the report, have already put their ideas in, and ideas has been gathered and compromised and then structured into the report, and therefore there's no need to vote against your own idea in the report. And therefore you will see the Chinese Congress usually pass any government reports with very high yes votes. People's-centered democracy is also another way the Chinese government call their democracy. It is people-centered. This is not only a concept, but a set of political and economic order covering politics, economy, society, and culture. The market economy is also implemented. But in comparison, Europe and United States are capitalist countries, where China is a socialist country. The fundamental reason is that China is a people-centered political and economic order, whereas the European Western-style countries are capital-centered. That means the capitalist is given priority over the common people, whereas in China it is the other way around, and that means capital has to work for the people. The capital is not working for themselves. There is one big difference here. People-centered does not mean that individual rights are the center. The people not only refer to each individual, but also as a whole. If there's no common freedom and common rights, there will be no individual freedom and individual rights. All our freedoms and rights come from the collective agreement that we can do something, and that means the whole society itself try to constrain some people's individual rights in order to achieve a common good. A very simple example is that we are not free to hit anybody. This is against the law. We shouldn't hurt anybody. Why? Because collectively the society thinks that it is better for everybody to behave civilly, because that is a good for the common. In that sense, the individual rights to arbitrarily hit anybody or hurt anybody is removed or restricted. You cannot do that. Therefore, our individual freedom is based on what are granted by the community in which we live in. So, if you put the individual rights and freedoms in front of the common rights and freedoms, then it will become the law of the jungle, which is not what we want to. And hence, when we talk about people-centered governments, the government take issue about the whole of the people, not an individual people. Uh, People center means that the collective citizenship being composed of more than 1 billion people, actually it's 1,400,000,000 people, requires the acquires the main focus of the government and becomes the center of political and economic order. A society based on capital gives the people the illusion of freedom, but gives the capital the absolute power in essence, so that people's freedom and rights become empty words. Let's look at another issue of the society, is the social divide. The United States is the most developed capitalist modern country in the world. But in 2021, last year, the the richest top three people own about half of the country's wealth. And in the United States, at least 40% of them are unable to come up with $400 for emergency. And this figure may be even higher under the impact of the COVID. With more than 500,000 people living on the streets, Chinese-style modernization is not about becoming a polarized world like the United States, but about building a world of great harmony where all people are prophets. To achieve common prosperity, one must first continue to improve productivity, continue to make the economic size bigger. So we want to make the cake bigger. And then we talk about the fair distribution of the cake, the fair distribution of these economic gains, and the efficiency are not opposing forces. In fact, at this stage of development, the inequality of wealth is an important factor restricting the economic development. Why? Because if we have more people in the middle class, that means the whole consumption will increase. And therefore, it makes sense to make everybody able to participate in the economic activities of the country. To do that, we need everybody to be able to have access to a certain amount of wealth. And when they have this wealth, then the society as a whole will generate economic activities to meet the demand of these people and hence economic development. Now, at this stage, if the cake is not shared fairly, there is no way to make it bigger. Promoting common prosperity is itself the only way to further improve economic development. At least this is what the Chinese government really believes in. It is now necessary to rearrange the various elements of production. China will need to build a fairer and reasonable property rights structure, economic gains distribution mechanism, reasonable allocation of ownership, use rights, operational rights, disposition rights, mortgage rights, income rights, etc., etc. We are not only focusing on capital, we are focusing on various rights, including, for example, use rights. Use right actually refers to the intellectual property. If I have a piece of intellectual property, this intellectual property has to be used correctly. We cannot use patents to forbid other people using the technique to improve their process, which some of the patents are being used in this way in the Western world. And it is also important to achieve a fairer and more reasonable distribution of these economic gains. In distribution, we talk about three different levels of distribution: the primary, the secondary, and the tertiary. I will explain that in the next few slides. The path to common prosperity is not only material, but spiritual and cultural as well. So when the Chinese is embarking on its second 100-year project, one of the key elements of this Second 100 years objective is to achieve common prosperity. Now, this common prosperity is not only material, it also is cultural as well as spiritual. So let's explain what are the primary distribution, secondary distribution, and the tertiary distribution. The primary distribution means when we have an economic activity, the economic activity will generate some economic benefits. The economic benefits have to be shared fairly among all the participating members of the activity. Of course, in a typical economic activity, we have the capital, we have the intellectual properties, we have the land ownership, and obviously we also have the people who actually participate and make the economic activities a reality. In the capitalist world, the capital dictates how the profit or the benefits are being distributed. In most companies, the major concern is to make maximum profit. But for whom? In most Western-style capitalist system, maximum profit goes to the capital. So it makes sense for them to minimize the workers' wages or salary, to minimize the cost involving land or machinery or intellectual properties, because the sole benefit of the economic activities all goes to the capital. Now, this distribution of the economic wealth is the primary distribution, and China want to make sure that in this first distribution it is already fair. That means the workers should have a fair amount of the economic gains from participating in the economic activity. So that is the primary distribution of economic gains. We want to start from the very beginning to be fair and reasonable. The second level is, of course, the government. Taxation is being collected by the government, not only to support government operations, but it is also a means to distribute economic gains of the whole country. By collecting more from the rich and then providing services to the poor, that is another way of saying taking some economic benefits from the rich and distribute it to the poor. So that this is a secondary distribution, and this distribution is usually maintained by law. The government sets different laws to assign the ratio of profits in different wealth levels. You are more wealthy, you usually have to pay more tax, and in that sense you have to put in more of your income to the government, who will distribute it to the needy members of the society. The third distribution refers to all the welfare provided by the non-profit organizations. It refers to the wealth distribution by wealthy people in the community by donation. It is not forced. You're free to donate whatever you like, and that donation collected and then serve a particular purpose you think worth your while. So this is based on empathy and based on the goodwill of all the members of the society. So that is the tertiary distribution. So if we have done the first primary distribution well, then the secondary and the tertiary distribution becomes just an assistance to make sure that the unfortunate members of the society is being looked after as well. The focus of the government development in China, at least in the next few years, will be on cyberspace. People activities has been increasingly focused on cyberspace. This is an intergenerational transition brought by the rise of the mobile internet. Cyberspace is more than just information dissemination and public opinion. It is a continuous migration of social, economic, political, and knowledge domain. We are seeing more and more economic development, social activities taking place in cyberspace. And obviously, politics will also take place in cyberspace as well. And of course, is the sharing of human knowledge. There are incompatibility of the government real space and the cyberspace. The government is trying to chase up of what is happening in cyberspace at the moment. So we need some kind of governance into the cyberspace in order, just like we need governance in our daily life, in our real space. Here is an example coming from United States. I think people recognize this particular picture or photograph. A white American policeman kneeling and killing a black people, George Floyd. I think everybody knows the consequence of this photograph. This event has caused uproar and protests, not only in United States, but many parts of the world. So this uproar and this organization and this stimulation of people's reaction all come from cyberspace. Of course, people are angry, okay, and then we see the racial injustice, and this is exactly why there are so many protests and uproar in the world. Fair. But at the same time, almost 1 million Americans has been killed by COVID-19. Why there is not any uproar about the inept response of the U.S. government? We see protest, but the protest is not about almost 1 million people have died. It is about the government asking the citizens to wear, for example, face mask or have vaccine. Why? Why a dead black man causes uproar, whereas almost 1 million lives, including a lot of white people, black people, all kinds of people, doesn't produce the same social response? Why there's no uproar? Obviously, that means the governance in the cyberspace has a problem. The problem is not being able to stimulate sufficient social activities against the inept response of the U.S. government towards its COVID patients. Okay, looking forward, I will call 2020 a watershed moment in world politics. We are in a historical stage of major changes and restructuring. Since the end of the Cold War, the new round of unbalanced expansion of the global capitalist system has now reached its limit. The contradiction between the East and the West, the contradiction between the North and the South, and the contradiction between the wealthy and the poor. There has been waves of anti-globalization. We are encountering unprecedented crises. Peace, development of mankind are all being challenged. The old world structure is disintegrating, while the new world structure is yet to be formed. Humans in the 21st century are at a turbulent crossroads. Our society is experiencing all kinds of chaos: politics, governance, ecology, peace, public health, and the war currently taking place in Ukraine, But at the same time, do you know that there's another three wars also taking place at the same time? The Israel against the Palestinian, the Saudi Arabic between the Arabic bombarding Yemen, and do you also know that American since August last year has now resumed bombing of Somalia? In terms of casualties, these other three wars probably produce more casualties than the war between Russia and Ukraine. But look at our news feeds. How many of you know that there are the three other wars currently taking place at the same time? The war between Israel and its illegally occupied Palestinian territories. The war between Saudi Arabia with Yemen. The United States resumption of bombing of Somalia. I don't think a lot of people know that it has been happening. Why? The cyberspace is not fairly balanced in reporting. That's why. The Western political system is based on cycles of election and then disappointment and then change of government by another election and then another round of disappointment and so on. Hasn't provided any workable solutions to these problems. For example, the COVID-19. We haven't seen any workable solutions by the Western governments. The number of infections is now sitting at almost 1 million every day. 1 million new infections every day. And the number of deaths is sitting around at 8,000 to 10,000 every day. Why there isn't a workable solution to stop the pandemic? Yes, there is mechanism to stop it. Look at China. China suffered the first pandemic, the initial strike of this COVID-19. But within 3 months, it is now under control, and Chinese people resume normal lives. How about the West? We have been under this COVID for 2 years now. We have many of our people died. But is there any workable solution provided by our government? They emphasize on vaccine, but we know that vaccine only reduces the hospitalization and deaths. It doesn't stop the virus from propagating, and therefore we will continue to suffer COVID infections and deaths. The Western political system hasn't provided any workable solutions to these problems. Elected officials come and go. Problems are still there and are being kicked along. Maybe we should re-examine the hypothesis that election is a suitable way of forming any government. Thank you for your attention, and we will see you next week at the same time. Bye-bye.